listen, praise, ask, exit. And then I'm out of there. Hi everyone, Susan Jones, and welcome back to my Sunday Spotlight. This week I wanted to kind of look at our writing conferences. If you are teaching K through 2 and it's January now, it's likely that you've held a couple conferences in your classroom. Now you might be a professional writing conference holder and you love your writing conferences, or you might be like most of us who find them a little intimidating. So I'm going to go ahead and teach you 3 mistakes to avoid while running your writing conferences. That way they can run a little more smoothly in your classroom. Let's go. Mistake number 1 you might be making is that you are holding a mini lesson at your conference table. Now you might be thinking, why is that a mistake? It's a writing conference, of course I'm supposed to teach my students some things, but really you should try to gear your conference time, instead of as a mini lesson, you want to try to turn it into a conversation. It's important to remember that writers of all ages are really sensitive to their writing. Writing is a deeply personal thing. I know that if I had to go ahead and write an essay and then share it with all of you to judge and critique against all these rubrics, my heart would be pounding. I want you to remember that your students feel that same way. So keeping this in the back of your mind, there are a few things you can do to really try to open up this conversation and make your students feel just a little more welcomed and maybe not as nervous. The first one's pretty obvious, but it's to listen eagerly and purposefully. Make sure you are really listening to them. Now, I used to really like to roam the room and I would kind of look over the student and we would have a little quick chat. But even if you're just checking in and not holding a formal writing conference, I found that it's much more personal to get on their eye level. So sitting eye level, looking them directly in the eye when they're talking to you, that will also help them open up a little bit more. Another thing to do is to really feel the emotions of what they are writing and what they're telling you. Meaning if they're writing a sad story, show that on your face. This is not really the time to act teachery and stoic and as they're reading their thing, kind of making a tally marks and a checklist of everything you want to change about their writing. This is the time to just listen to what they're saying. If it's funny, laugh. Like I said, if it's sad, make sure you show that in your face. Tell them you're sorry. Have a conversation about that and let students know that you're really listening to them. While your writing conferences are exactly where you're going to be teaching them about writing, it's through these conversations that you get to know your students so well, and it's such a nice time that you can really just cherish with each one of them. Over the summer, I read this book, A Teacher's Guide to Writing Conferences. This is one of the Classroom Essentials by Heinemann. This one's by Carl Anderson, and it's for K through 8, but there was a ton of great information in here for K through 2 students. I thought it was wildly helpful, so if you're looking for a little more PD, I would definitely check out this book. Carl Anderson actually goes through a couple phrases that you can use to begin these conversations instead of your conferences, and they really help set the tone for these short little sessions that you're going to be having where you can listen to your students and teach them at the same time. The phrase that he loves to use is just, "How's it going?" It says nothing about the writing at all, but as the student, it lets you know that your teacher is wondering how you're doing, wondering how things are going today, and they can kind of take that question however it reaches them, which is great because then if your student answers and they're like, "I've had kind of a bad day, I'm, fighting with a friend," and you're like, okay, that has nothing to do with writing whatsoever, but that very quickly tells you that guess what, over at their independent writing station, their mind is probably preoccupied. They're probably not doing that writing anyway. So once they have said that to you, you can kind of gear the conversation back towards writing, help them work through that issue, and move on and get to writing faster than they might have been able to on their own. My favorite way to start a conference is by asking them, "What are you doing as a writer today?" Or "Tell me what you're thinking when it comes to your writing." This helps put the ball in their court, and it really lets you see what they're thinking when it comes to their own writing. What have they taken from your mini lessons earlier? What have they taken from the mentor texts? And just how they're feeling in general about the piece that they have been writing. This leads us into mistake number 2, which you should avoid, which is to focus on the student's writing. Yes, you heard that correctly. You don't want to focus on the student's writing. Now, I know that's strange, but instead you want to shift your mindset, and instead of focusing on the student's writing in front of you, you want to try to focus on that student. Some of those questions I was saying, tell me what you're thinking about your writing. Tell me how you feel about how your writing's going today. Things like that. That never asks them, what are you writing about? If you kind of turn your focus and you ask them, what are you writing about? What does this part mean? It gets the student thinking about what's actually on the paper. And in fact, during your writing conference, it can take you off track from what you're really trying to teach them. I can name countless writing conferences that I had where we spent a good 5-6 minutes just talking about the story, or how that happened to me one time too, or how that made them feel. And now there's ways you can use that where, you're then adding it to the writing, but again, it kind of gets them off track. Because realistically, we know that if we look at a student's writing, especially in grades K through 2, we could make a whole laundry list of mistakes and things that they need to change. But that should not be our focus whatsoever. Because first of all, their writing is very likely developmentally appropriate. It is supposed to be filled with spelling and grammatical errors. That's what we're teaching them to do. It should not sound like my writing. It shouldn't sound like a bunch of sentence stems that they've just filled in the blanks. In the writing workshop atmosphere, we really want students to be able to express their own opinions and their own thoughts and work through that writing process in a manner in which they are not discouraged, but instead they're built up. These writing conferences allow you to take notes on what students are doing, and if you start to have the same conversations with many of your students, that's going to give you a hint that you might need to reteach a full mini lesson to the class. Or that lets you know that, hey, there's a handful, about 5 or 6 students who all are really missing their transition words. And even when we have these conversations, and even when I'm asking them to listen to how I read this, and doesn't it sound better with transition words, they're still not adding them. Then maybe I pull a strategy group. But this writing conference time is really a time to chat with them, check in on how they're feeling, and a lot of times I will even ask them specifically, what can I do to help you with your writing today? Now, of course, you are still the teacher, so if they think they are done and they just keep saying, I'm done, I'm done, I'm done, no, I'm done, I don't need anything, then yes, it is time to kind of pull it out of them. And I have a whole list of nudging questions that you can use to try to get these conversations going. But before I get to that, let me just share mistake number 3. And mistake number 3 is just that our writing conferences are too long. I feel like that's a pretty common mistake because it is really easy, especially as a teacher, to ramble on. You want to make this quick. I like to aim for anywhere between 4 and 7 minutes per writing conference, and what I always do is I always set my timer. I usually just use my cell phone. I set my timer for 5 minutes. Now, I absolutely hide it from my student because I never in any way want to intimidate them by any sort of time crunch. So I just do it and it's just for me. It has no noise, but I can see when it lights up, and that just tells me at the 5-minute mark that I have to start wrapping up this conversation. It just keeps me accountable. Another way to keep it quick is to really follow the same exact format. I follow the same 4 steps for every writing conference that I hold. It's listen, praise, ask, exit. Now, for the listen part, it's really just using those conversation starters. Like we talked about before, this is not a mini lesson. This is a time for you to listen, and that means listen with your eyes as well. Kind of perform a visual check-in to see how your student is doing. You can tell pretty quickly if your student is not really enthused about their writing, and maybe that's time for a conversation about switching it up. Scrap it. Go ahead and grab a new piece of paper. Let's start with a different small moment and a different personal narrative. Let's write about something we're excited about. Next is the praising aspect, and Lucy Calkins calls this her lasting compliment, and it's really a way for students to feel empowered and energized about their writing. So as you do a quick scan or you listen to their conversation about what students are adding to their paper or how they're feeling about their writing, make sure you name a specific compliment. Meaning you don't just look through and say, oh, I love your illustrations. But instead, you say something like, I love your illustrations. I really feel like I can actually picture where you were in this story. It helps me feel like I was there. And another thing to note is that sometimes your students' mistakes might also be seen as their compliment. For instance, I have had plenty of students in the past, especially when we are working on adding quotation marks to our conversations in our writing. Students use them wrong all the time, right? But a specific praise is that it's great that they're using them. So I point out, I love how you are using your quotation marks to really show me what your mom is saying in this story. Through the conversation, I can show them, I can actually read what's in their quotation marks and they can see if that is really working and we can learn how to fix it. But first, I've already praised them because I do genuinely love that they're trying it out. So the first two parts are going to be pretty quick. You're just starting off the conversation, asking them how they're feeling, naming a strength, and this is the part that took me the longest to kind of train my brain with, I guess. And it's something I still work on. And it is asking instead of telling. So this is where your teaching point comes in. This is where if you need your student to write more details, you are not just saying, hey, we really need to add some more details in here to kind of bulk it up and here's why. That's great, that's fine. That's what you do during your mini lesson, right? You explicitly state what you want to add and you show them how to do it. Now you're going to do the same thing, but you're going to see if you can twist it into a question instead. Ask them, this is where you're brainstorming and you're saying, what other details can you add here? You're kind of probing and seeing what details they already have so they can dictate it to you and say it out loud first. This is especially helpful in K through 2 classrooms. And then you exit, meaning you have just given them that talking point. You've asked them about those details. You asked them, where do you think they can go in the story? If they don't know, of course, you can tell them that because you've already asked them their teaching point first. Then you leave them. You've just given them exactly what to do. They've already thought about it, brainstormed it themselves with a little bit of your guidance, and now they're on their way to go ahead and add those details on their own. Other than asking, the exit part is my second hardest because honestly, I could sit and talk to each student for 15 and 20 minutes about their writing, about their thoughts, their feelings, everything about their writing. But first, I have a million other students I need to meet with. And secondly, it's more beneficial to them to kind of put their teaching point in their brain, have them have thought about it, and then they get to do it on their own. Now, as they're on the way back to their seat, this is where I jot down the questions I ask them or the teaching points as I get ready for my next student to come over. Now, writing conferences is a huge topic and I could honestly talk more and more and more about it, and it's something that you could spend an entire year focusing on getting better at. In fact, you could spend year after year trying to get better at it. So in no way am I a writing conference expert. All these tips I remind myself of whenever I have to do a writing conference, and it's just something you give yourself a little grace about and you just try to improve a little bit at a time. That's all we can do. To make your lives a little bit easier, I did come up with a bunch of tools that I think might help you. I'll go ahead and insert some pictures here, but I came up with a couple writing conference note-taking sheets that you can go ahead and use in your classroom. I also came up with a list of possible teaching points that you might want to focus on with your students. These are common in K through 2 classrooms. And I also share some of those nudging questions to kind of get your conferences unstuck like I mentioned earlier. I'll leave a link down in my description where I actually talk about all of these 3 mistakes and I go a little bit more in depth. I have a whole video training about this. You'll hear a lot of the same information, but I talk a little bit more about it. And you can also grab all those free writing tools with the link below. I really hope you enjoyed this video. Writing is my favorite subject to teach. I think I'm really naturally good. This is gonna sound like I'm bragging, but I naturally think I am good at teaching math to students, if that makes sense. It comes easily to me. I can always just off the top of my head think of a ton of fun games. That might be like my strength, I guess, in the classroom. But writing was always more difficult. I think that's kind of why I love it so much. I feel like it's such a challenge to get your K through 2 students excited and energized to go ahead and write these like 5-page papers. But I think because it's so hard, it's something that like I said, I really challenge myself to try to get better at, and it's something that I want to learn about more and more every day. If you have any questions or comments about writing conferences or any other ideas you want to see me do videos about, go ahead and leave them in the comment section down below and I will try to answer them. And as always, make sure you're subscribed to my channel and click that bell. That way you're notified every week of my new video. See you soon. Bye.